Sometimes the fragments of silicons are early, and sometimes they are not.
All right, welcome to another installment of the Fragments of Silicon European Interviews. Right, joining us this week is you mentioned that you have a hard name pronounced, so uh, if I mess it up, I apologize in advance. But we got Olivier Larrieu of Eon Games.
Hello.
Yes, hello. How are you doing today?
Great. It's Friday.
Indeed. Like, right. So let's get into things. We'd like to start by getting to know the person behind the games, the studio, and whatnot by asking this question: what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Video game making.
Not just video game development, but video games in general.
I started playing video games when I was 10. So that's oh my, more than 30 years ago now. And I've played games for so long that it felt natural for me to stay immersed in the video game universe, and I've also always liked how do you say mm, yes I play games, but I also write stories and a lot of things like that. So I never thought about it, but after I played a game, we can talk about that later. I thought that maybe I could mix my two hobbies of playing video games and writing stories and making a game with one of my stories.
And now, in terms of writing stories, is that something you've done professionally, or is that just like a hobby you like
No,
to?
no, it was all on a hobby level.
Okay, and what kinds of stories did you like writing?
Mostly fictions.
Hmm.
Um, I my style is rather dark and serious style of stories. So the kind of political intrigues or dark
Hmm.
atmospheres, that kind of stories.
I mean, I can definitely say that's reflected in Bleeding Moons,
Yes,
um, given a lot of what's contained within it.
I'm
Like,
very bad at writing comedy. I tried, but well, it's not very good.
I mean, people have different talents in different areas, and yeah, yours seem to excel in the dramatic. Nothing to be ashamed about.
Thank you.
Indeed. Um, but so that's kind of like the tonality and some of the contents of your stories. Uh, you know, were your non-Bleeding Moon stories also similar, like political thrillers?
Mm, yes, you could say that. Uh, well, most of the time they are rather short stories. I haven't written novel-sized stories, and then Bleeding Moons was the first one, and so they are mostly revolving about around one theme,
Mm-hmm.
a short story with a few characters, and well, not enough material to make a game around one of my story.
And was your intent in terms of making a video game story or a story video game, however you want to frame that, always meant to be a commercial one, or is it just something you wanted to test the waters out with?
No, actually, I started like playing video games and writing games and writing stories, and I started mixing both as a hobby, making games. See, so why not? And in fact, yes, at first it was to test the water, and I had after a year of development, I had around 20-25% of my game done, and I thought that it was enough material to show to other people to get feedback, and I sent my game to the Alex d'Or contest, which is an international contest for games made with the engine RPG Maker. And I thought, why not send it there? Have the feedback from people who are used to play that kind of games and see what they like and what they don't like. And the feedback was tremendously good. I won 7 awards, including the base game and even the public choice. So it basically told me that my idea, my game, my story worked and clicked with other people. So I thought that maybe I should continue in this direction and try to make it the best I can, since obviously people like that kind of story and they were waiting for the full game. So yes, I've chosen the commercial path for to make this game as widely available as possible.
Right. And well, were you surprised at the reception that the Alex d'Or? Because going over it, game has won 7 awards: best game, public choice, best scenario, best direction, best world/background. Those are all the gold medals, and best story and best atmosphere and immersion for the silver medals.
Yes.
So what do the medals exactly represent here? Like, are the golds best in shows? The silver, like, are they the traditional, bronze, silver, and gold?
Yes, the traditional gold, silver, and bronze awards for different sections, categories, and not all the sections were fit. My game didn't fit, of course, the best platformer or best level design or combat mechanics. That didn't fit my game. So I was nominated in 7 categories and I won 7 awards. And everything was decided by the contest juries.
Okay.
And they had many games to test. They chose which game were worthy of going into the upper bracket and which other games were deemed not good enough for the contest.
See.
And at the end of the contest, well, I received all those awards, but I definitely didn't expect to win anything, and and surely not base game and all 7 awards. That was really a big surprise.
And so that convinced you to take this game to bigger levels, let's say. At how long did Bleeding Moons take to develop?
over 2 years, so several thousand of working hours, I spent all my free time. When I went back from work, all my weekends and my holidays, and every time when I had 1 hour of free time, I worked on the game. So yeah, it's 2 year, around 2 years.
Okay. Definitely see that. And how many words are contained within the game? Like, what's the final word count?
The English version it was 170,000 words.
It's a fair amount.
So that's a very big novel or two standard size novels.
No doubt. And what made you want to do the game in RPG Maker?
Um, After I played the game To the Moon, actually, it's a game that had a very big impact on me. And since it was made with RPG Maker, it was an older version of the engine that I use for Bleeding Moons, but it was still RPG Maker. And I didn't think of that engine at first because of its name. I didn't want to make an RPG. I wanted to make a story-centered game.
Mm-hmm.
But after having played To the Moon, I realized that it was actually possible to use this engine to tell a story, to focus on the characters and what it's happening to them, without having combat or anything the classic RPG tropes. So since the engine is quite easy to manipulate and there are a lot of resources available, it's also a 2D engine since I can do 3D modeling. And for small things in 2D, I can draw myself, even if the resources don't exist. I can still fill the gaps. So it was the choice of the engine started with To the Moon, and after I started using in the engine, I found that it was totally it worked for what I wanted to say.
That's good to hear. It sounds like you are, at the end of the day, pleased with your choice of engine. If it is a bit of an unconventional choice in terms of exploring narrative depths.
But it also has its limitations. There are some things that would have been smoother with a more specialized engine for adventure games, for example. But as I said, RPG Maker has this big advantage of having a lot of resources available, either for free or cheap. So I didn't have to draw everything from scratch, and that was a very big plus for me.
Right. And did the choice engine actually impact the words of the narrative? Like, was there anything about that engine that you had to adjust your story for?
In terms of story, not exactly. It's more about the gameplay mechanics. I was limited to the engine is basically using what we'd call a tile size area. So we move from one tile to one tile, and it has to be compatible with the keyboard. Mouse is not natively supported in RPG Maker. So every time I had an idea for a game mechanic or a puzzle, it had to be possible to solve the puzzle with the keyboard, and it's not always the best way to solve the puzzle. If you wanted to have something where you have to click on different areas or do a drag and drop of items or anything like that, it's impossible to do with just a keyboard. So there were limitations regarding the gameplay more than the story.
I see. And I suppose we should delve into that a bit more at this point, in the sense that what is the story of Bleeding Moons, and who is the protagonist? You know, all that stuff.
Right, it's a big story. It's a story of one man. In this case, he is the second son of a count, a noble. He was not destined to rule or be a count himself. He already has a big brother who is to be the next count. So he lives his life leisurely, reading books and writing short stories. And he's not a hero. He's your everyday man. But through events happening around him, he's thrown into a world that he was not prepared to face. And it's a story about how someone who is not a hero, who is not made to fight in a war, is thrown into this world, and he has to face the real world, if I can say, the world around him, a world of violence that is not the world of a noble. And he has to be confronted to his own conscience, to how far he's willing to go to protect his country and to save the people he loves.
Indeed, it's quite the dark tale. Although, I suppose my question in that direction is this just an inherently dark story, or like, can you go through the game without doing certain actions, let's say? Like, can you make it through the game without killing anyone?
Not everyone. There are sometimes people that you are obliged to kill, since it's basically a kill or be killed, and he doesn't have a choice. Not always. Sometimes you can choose, and it's taken into account by the game. But yes, there are other times where you don't have a choice and you have to do your duty, do what you are told to do, and it's very hard for the character because he was not prepared for that, and he knows he has to do, he has to kill, but he doesn't like it and he doesn't want to do it. And so he's torn between his own conscience and his duty toward his own country.
Yeah. That's about what I thought, since I was supposed to give a bit more description to it. This is a war thing. Like, Count Ian has to do things in the name of war. And, the common refrain there is, you have to do ugly killing in order to win a war. Though it is a bit of a different context than a lot of war stories, because he's not a soldier. To once again, like, get down to brass tacks, he's an assassin.
He's trained as an assassin, yes.
Yeah. I mean, and he's doing wet work stuff. Like, what was the thought process turning him into, a cloak and dagger kind of character, instead of, like your more traditional kind of soldier or officer?
Well, Ian was never trained to use weapons. He had never held a sword or a dagger or any weapon.
Mm.
He he's totally not a soldier, but he's used to use his brain to write stories, a lot of imagination and that's exactly why the leader of the mercenary troop where he's sent is using Yan because he doesn't want someone who will kill on sight. He wants someone who can use his head and, uh, and and think how to achieve his goal. But sometimes killing is not even necessary. The objective is the only thing that matters. But the means to reach the objective is up to Yan.
Right. And as another question I have is, he is named Count Ian. Does that have any connection to your company name, Ian Games?
Yes, and actually it went backwards. I first thought of the name of the character, Yan, and
Mm.
when I was thinking about the kind of game I was doing, I thought that it was an interactive story, and it was an adventure game, and it was also a mix of visual novel. And so I thought about all those worlds, and I realized that it was an interactive adventure novel. And when you take the first letters, it IAN, just like Ian. So I had the name of the character and the name of the studio mix. They matched
Uh-huh.
just yes. Yeah, for that. So, I don't know how to say that in English. Yes, they work together because they, they, it's an interactive adventure novel, and it's all about Ian is always present on screen, and everything is seen from his point of view.
Hmm. And in terms of the backstory and the lore, if you will, of Bleeding Moons here, um, was that something that you created over the course of the game, or did you? Is this a shared universe? Like, have you used stories from these countries in other tales?
No, at first I used a novel I wrote a long time ago, and actually I lost this novella when I moved, but so I worked from memory, and I used the world, not the story, but the world, the context of a king that has been assassinated, and a noble who is sent to war. But almost everything from that had been created especially for the game.
I see. And another aspect, probably the other key aspect of Bleeding Moons here, is the romance tales. It's not just a tale of blood-soaked war. There are three, I think, ladies that you can eventually end up with.
Yes, indeed, the romance part is a very big part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a dark story, but it's not all dark, or it would have been very boring. And yes, there are three possible romances, and they are all happening at the same time. If I can say, it's. I mean, in most games, when you choose one girl to have a romance with, you are then on a path where you can only be with the girl you have chosen, and that didn't feel very realistic for me. So I chose to instead have the possibility go with someone and break up later and go with another woman, or maybe at the same time. You can cheat, you can lie, but you can also be truthful, and it's a very realistic romance system where you can really choose to what you want to do with any of the three women, and of course there are consequences to the choices you make.
Indeed, I gotta say it's among the messiest romance. Um, I'm not sure exactly what the piece is, I suppose, that I've seen in a video game. And that's actually a good thing because honestly, a lot of video game romance is a lot more straightforward. You know, it's or like getting into visual novel tales. It's a lot of um, you know wooing and then connecting, so to speak. Um, so it's it is not necessarily unique, but fairly rarefied romance that be you can break up with somebody or you can date multiples at a time. So
Yes.
um, now I'm not sure if you can answer this question because it might be a spoiler, but at the not necessarily end of the game, but at the end of the romance cycle, do you have to end up with one of the three ladies?
No.
Yeah.
Even during the game or at the end of the game, you can choose to be and finish the game alone if you prefer. The romance is complex, but it's also possible to choose no one for any reason. Since it's something that is possible to do in real life, and I wanted a realistic romance system, so I didn't force a romance. I have a default romance with a childhood friend, but it's possible to break up with her when you are in the adult age of Yan.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't try to romance the other women, you can and finish the game alone, and it's totally natural for the story.
Okay. Um, and also, in terms of endings, are there multiple endings, or is there one ending and it's more about how you get there?
There are four big endings, and you have sub endings inside, depending on the choices you have made throughout the game. So it's not because you have successfully finished with one girl and let's say you marry her and you're happy. But if you have completely messed during the game, during the story, it may be that your past comes back to hit you hard.
I see. And let's see here. How long is the game on average? Like, how long is it going to take somebody to get through the story, like the main story, first time
Mm,
around?
well, I say the fastest players beat the game in around 8 to 9 hours, and they obviously went very fast. Either they read fast or they have skipped a lot of optional content. For the more thorough playthrough, I'd say up to 15 hours.
Yeah, that's about what I thought. And let's see, in bringing this game to market, how did you end up with Phoenix Online?
Because I was looking for a publisher, and since I'm very bad at marketing and social media in general, well, it's one thing to make a game, and it's another thing to sell it. And I I had played the first games of Phoenix, especially I started with the Cognition, and I love the games they make or publish, and I thought that it was in, um, uh, what can I say? They have this motto that is every game has a story, and this is exactly what my game is. It's a story. It's not an action game. It's not a platformer. It's not an infinity running game. It's it's an adventure game, and it focuses a lot on the story. So it was the perfect match for Phoenix. So I contacted them, and they loved the game immediately, and we started working very quickly.
That's good to hear. And how's the reception been for the game since it got released? Have you been keeping track of reviews and such?
There are reviews, not a lot, but hopefully, I hope there will be more. But until then, all the reviews I've seen, either on Steam or on GOG, they are all positive. So that's quite a success, I'd say. Uh, since usually people are more vocal to say something that they didn't like, and I haven't have any negative review so far, so maybe people liked my game.
I'm like, I mean, that's a fair assumption, I think. Especially speaking of reviews, did you manage to watch our review of the game?
Yes, on a Fragment of Silicons, yes.
That's good. I'm glad you liked it.
Yes, it's always interesting to see and hear other people what they have to say about my game and what they think, what they like, what they didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
As a game developer, feedback is something that is really important. Of course, now it's a bit late if the game is made, but feedback is always something that is welcome and very important for any developer.
Indeed. And I suppose my final question in regards to Bleeding Moons, well, actually, two questions. First of all, what is the Bleeding Moon that the title represents here? Because I couldn't exactly discern that from my playtime.
Mm, the short answer would be the Bleeding Moons are the three main female characters.
Okay.
So a bit longer answer would be that well, the moon part came from the name of the characters, the female characters, since we have River Moon, not to the game To the Moon, and which features a female character named River. So I reused the name as a nod. And then we have Luna, the mercenary. And at that point, I had the third character, the Duchess of Thorem, and she didn't have the name at that point when I was watching the story. And I realized that with River Moon and the other character Luna, I already have something about the moon. So I decided to name the third character Selene, or maybe Celine in English. So I had the moon part covered. As for the bleeding part, it's because all three women are bleeding in their hearts. They all have something that is preventing them to be fully happy. And Jan is a potential love interest for them, since it's a reciprocated love if you choose them. And he is able to possibly heal the bleeding hearts of the female characters. So yes, the bleeding moons are the three women, and of course it also refers to the blood of the assassination mission of Jan during the war.
I see. And trying to figure out the proper way to ask this question, because I'm, I suppose, frame it this way. Do you see yourself writing another tale in this Bleeding Moons universe, for a lack of better term? Not necessarily a sequel, but there's a lot of countries here. There's,
Yes.
you know,
It's a big world, and I only focus on mainly 3 countries, maybe 4 with a neighboring country. So there is a lot to say, but I initially wanted to make some kind of sequel, an after story, but it was almost impossible to do, since there are too many choices and too many consequences. And if I had to make a sequel, I would have to choose a canon situation, and I didn't want to force the player to see a canon end game to a story that I wanted to be tailored by the player's choices. So if I make a story, it will either be at the same time, but happening with other people.
about
So
what I thought. I suppose there's also the possibility of moving the time scale, like, having the scenario take place, say 20 years before this, or something 100 years in the future.
it's something that could be made. Maybe a prequel. It's easier, since of course I wouldn't have to deal with the consequences in the Bleeding Moon game. Either a prequel or a story happening at the same time. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose we'll wrap things up by seeing if my colleagues here have any questions of their own to ask.
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied.
Okay. Well, Olivier, it was wonderful having you on our program.
Thank you.
Indeed. It was nice hearing about the game. And, if people who are listening to this haven't listened to our review of Bleeding Moons, I quite enjoyed it. One of the better things I played this year. And it comes recommended. And indeed, the game is Bleeding Moons. You can get it on Steam today for $9.99. All right, so that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in on Sunday for our traditional review session. Till then, I wish you good gaming.
Thank you. Goodbye.